Oh, McQueen. Crazy McQueen. McQueen and I got along pretty good. McQueen looked at me kind of like an older brother.
A look back at the life of James Garner, one of Hollywood's most admired and relatable actors. Garner built his legacy on quiet resilience and natural charm, with a life story that often mirrored the on-screen heroes he portrayed. He was a household name for generations, yet behind that charisma were truths he rarely spoke about. These were truths about his struggles, the pain he endured, and the people in Hollywood who tested his patience. One of those people was Steve McQueen. For decades, Garner kept his thoughts guarded. But in the twilight of his life, he finally allowed the truth to surface. What he revealed would change how fans saw not only McQueen, but also the legacy of Garner himself. A childhood marked by loss and cruelty. James Scott Bumgarner was born on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma, into a household that would never be described as warm. His mother died when he was just 5 years old after a botched medical procedure, leaving James and his two brothers in the care of their father, Weldon, who struggled to keep his family afloat. Instead of stability, the boys were met with neglect and abuse. Weldon remarried, but the arrival of Wilma, James's stepmother, only deepened their suffering. James later recalled the cruelty she inflicted, including beatings with tree branches, deliberate humiliation, and even forcing him to wear women's clothing as punishment. At just 14 years old, Garner's pain boiled over. During one violent encounter, he fought back against Wilma and overpowered her. The confrontation ended only because his father stepped in, but by then the scars of childhood trauma had already shaped him. Soon after, Weldon abandoned the family altogether, leaving James and his brothers to fend for themselves. Despite this darkness, a small light appeared when another stepmother, Grace, entered his life. Unlike Wilma, she showed kindness and gave James something he had long been missing, a sense of maternal warmth. Garner later called her Mama Grace, a reminder that family is not always about blood, but about love and dignity. Still, those early wounds never fully left him. They created a man who was both resilient and distrustful, traits that would later define his dealings with Hollywood's most difficult personalities, including Steve McQueen, from war hero to reluctant star. After a troubled childhood, James Garner found himself thrust into the brutal realities of adulthood at a young age. In 1950, he was drafted into the U.S. Army and sent to fight in the Korean War with the 5th Regimental Combat Team of the 24th Infantry Division. The boy who had once endured abuse at home was suddenly navigating the unforgiving terrain of combat. Within days of arriving, shrapnel from a mortar attack tore into him. Months later, while crouched in a foxhole, he was wounded again, this time by friendly fire. Garner never dramatized these injuries, but the truth was undeniable. He had risked his life, and he carried those scars for the rest of his days. His service earned him 2 Purple Hearts, though the second medal took decades to arrive because of a paperwork error. With his dry humor, he later joked that waiting 32 years for recognition was like ordering a pizza and having it arrive when you were no longer hungry. Beneath the humor, though, was a quiet resilience. Garner had seen war. He had seen death, and unlike many who glamorized such experiences, he spoke of them with honesty. "I'm not a hero," he insisted. "I just did my job." It was in Korea that another quirk of his life developed, an intense aversion to garlic. Odd as it seemed, this sensitivity once saved his life. On one cold night while on guard duty, he smelled garlic drifting through the air and realized that enemy soldiers, known for their garlic-heavy diets, were approaching. His quick instincts led his unit to ambush the enemy, likely preventing a deadly surprise attack. Returning home, Garner drifted between jobs, from modeling Janssen bathing suits to laying carpets with his father. He hated modeling, joking that no amount of money was worth standing around in swimwear. His fate changed when he met Paul Gregory, a theatrical producer who saw potential in him and suggested acting. At first, Garner resisted. He didn't see himself as a performer. But when he later reconnected with Gregory, the door to Hollywood opened. His first big break came with a non-speaking role in the Caine Mutiny court-martial. From there, parts trickled in, but the defining moment arrived in 1957 when he was cast as Brett Maverick in the television Western Maverick. Garner's charm, wit, and effortless timing transformed the show into a sensation. Almost overnight, the kid from Oklahoma who once had nothing became a star. But with fame came battles, against studios, against exploitation, and later against fellow actors like Steve McQueen, whose ambition often clashed with Garner's grounded approach. Maverick, Hollywood battles, and The Great Escape. By the late 1950s, James Garner was no longer the struggling young man from Oklahoma. With Maverick, he had become one of television's most bankable stars. His portrayal of Brett Maverick, a sly gambler who relied on charm and brains more than brute force, stood out from the typical stoic cowboys of the era. Week after week, Garner's quick wit and relaxed demeanor drew audiences in, making Maverick a ratings powerhouse. But Hollywood's success often came with strings attached, and Garner soon found himself at odds with Warner Brothers, the very studio that had made him a star. In 1960, a writers' strike shut down television production, and Warner Brothers' wars abruptly laid Garner off, claiming they had no work for him. Despite Maverick's runaway popularity, Garner was earning just $22.50 a week, far less than his worth. Furious at being discarded so casually, he sued the studio for breach of contract. It was a bold, risky move in an industry where actors were expected to remain compliant. Yet Garner's gamble paid off. He won. The victory marked him as not only a leading man, but also a man unafraid to fight for fairness. Warner Brothers tried to lure him back with a raise, but the damage was done. Garner walked away, determined to chart his own path. That path led him to film, and soon after to one of the most iconic war dramas ever made, The Great Escape, 1963. Directed by John Sturges and based loosely on a true story, the film boasted a dream cast: Richard Attenborough, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, Donald Pleasance, and a rising star named Steve McQueen. Garner was cast as Flight Lieutenant Bob Hendley, nicknamed the Scrounger, a resourceful prisoner of war who could talk or charm his way into securing anything the escapees needed. McQueen played Captain Virgil Hiltz, the Cooler King, the rebellious loner whose motorcycle escape would become legendary. On screen, the two complemented each other. Off-screen, however, tensions brewed. McQueen, ambitious and fiercely competitive, bristled at Garner's easy charisma and natural ability to steal a scene without trying. Garner, professional to the core, saw McQueen as unpredictable, insecure, and self-centered. Their clashing personalities didn't explode outright during filming, but the undercurrent of rivalry was unmistakable. For Garner, this was not just another co-star. It was the beginning of a complicated relationship with one of Hollywood's most enigmatic figures. The rivalry with Steve McQueen. James Garner's reflections on Steve McQueen were candid, especially in interviews late in life. By the time he reached his 80s, Garner no longer felt the need to soften the truth. McQueen, he explained, was intensely driven, almost obsessively so, but that drive often crossed the line into arrogance. On the set of The Great Escape, McQueen arrived with a reputation as Hollywood's new action hero, ready to command the spotlight. Garner, in contrast, relied on a subtle presence. His humor, timing, and calm confidence drew attention without demanding it. The contrast was immediate and noticeable, both to the cast and the crew. McQueen's competitiveness manifested in small, persistent ways. He would challenge shots, test the limits of stunts, and assert dominance during rehearsals. Garner, patient and composed, generally allowed McQueen his space, believing the film's success depended on teamwork, not personal ego. Yet Garner later admitted there were moments he feared McQueen's recklessness could compromise not just the production, but the safety of others. The motorcycle scenes, while iconic today, involved real risks that could have ended badly. Garner, who valued professionalism and preparation, observed with quiet concern while McQueen thrived on danger. Behind the cameras, Garner recalled, McQueen sometimes spread subtle rumors, attempting to undermine others' reputations. Though he did not openly confront him, Garner described it as a survival mechanism, a way for McQueen to assert control in an environment filled with competition and pressure. Garner himself had experienced similar pressures in his early television years, but he approached challenges differently, preferring negotiation, contracts, and reason over confrontation. It was a philosophical clash as much as a personal one. Despite the tension, Garner acknowledged McQueen's undeniable talent. On screen, McQueen had charisma that captivated audiences and an intensity that made his stunts unforgettable. Garner respected that, even if he despised some of McQueen's off-screen behavior. Looking back, Garner noted the sad reality. Hollywood often encouraged such rivalries, pitting actors against each other for publicity and ratings, all while celebrating their camaraderie in interviews and press events. The truth, as Garner would finally share decades later, was far more complicated than the carefully constructed image of Hollywood friendship. Garner's later reflections and career lessons. In his later years, James Garner became unusually candid about the costs of a long career in Hollywood. At age 86, he spoke with a clarity that only comes after decades of reflection, sharing not just memories of Steve McQueen, but the broader pressures of the industry that shaped and at times scarred him. Garner admitted that the relentless grind of film and television left emotional and physical marks, many of which were invisible to the public. He had watched colleagues succumb to stress, drugs, and personal turmoil, and he often wondered if his own restraint was as much a survival tactic as a personal choice. Reflecting on McQueen, Garner acknowledged that the rivalry, while professionally challenging, taught him essential lessons about human nature and Hollywood's machinery. He explained that McQueen's drive and ego, though difficult, pushed him to maintain his own professionalism at all times. Garner realized that the industry's rewards, fame, fortune, and critical acclaim were often paired with invisible tolls, fractured friendships, the erosion of trust, and the constant tension between public image and private reality. Garner's wit and composure, honed over years of television work on maverick and later film roles, were tools that helped him navigate these hidden hazards. Garner also spoke of regret, a theme that surfaced more openly than he had ever admitted before. He confessed to moments of self-doubt, wondering whether he should have confronted certain slights or allowed his voice to be heard more forcefully in negotiations and creative decisions. Yet he balanced that with gratitude. He had managed to maintain a career that spanned 6 decades, with loyal fans, meaningful roles, and a reputation for integrity rare in Hollywood. The contrast between his methodical approach and McQueen's risk-taking underscored a truth Garner had long understood. Survival in Hollywood required more than talent. It demanded patience, strategy, and a careful awareness of one's own limits. Ultimately, Garner's reflections were tinged with melancholy. Fame, he revealed, often came at the expense of genuine relationships. Rivalries like the one with McQueen, while exaggerated by the media, were emblematic of the personal sacrifices demanded by the business. Garner's final message was clear. The glory of Hollywood is fleeting, but the consequences of its pressures linger long after the cameras stop rolling. In revealing the truth about McQueen so late in life, Garner seemed to seek a form of closure, a chance to tell the story as it truly was, unfiltered by studio politics or public expectation. Garner's legacy and closing thoughts. James Garner's final years were marked by both reflection and recognition. As he looked back over a life spent in front of the camera, he seemed less concerned with awards or box office numbers and more with the human truths he had witnessed and lived. He often emphasized the relationships that endured, the quiet bonds with co-stars who shared more than just scenes, and the rare friendships that survived Hollywood's volatility. His accounts of Steve McQueen, for example, were not meant to tarnish a colleague's image, but to illuminate the reality behind the myth, a man driven by ambition, flawed and vulnerable, navigating the same harsh world Garner had traversed. Garner's honesty at 86 was a gift to those who idolized the stars of classic Hollywood. He demonstrated that even legendary figures, with all their charisma and skill, were subject to insecurities, rivalries, and regrets. He showed that truth in the entertainment industry is rarely black and white. It is layered with complexity, shaped by personalities, circumstances, and decades of media distortion. Garner's willingness to finally speak openly about McQueen also reflected a broader understanding that preserving integrity in a cutthroat environment is a triumph in itself, and that sometimes the greatest stories are those left untold until the right moment. In his personal reflections, Garner underscored resilience as central to a fulfilling life. Despite injuries on set, public scrutiny, and the constant threat of being overshadowed by more flamboyant peers, he maintained a steady course. His life's work, from Maverick to the Rockford Files and countless film roles, illustrated a commitment to professionalism, authenticity, and subtle courage. Garner's legacy, therefore, is twofold: a catalogue of performances that remain timeless, and a human story of navigating ambition, rivalry, and the price of fame with grace. As he shared these stories, there was a quiet sadness, a recognition of what had been lost to ambition, misunderstanding, and time. But there was also a sense of peace, a final acknowledgement that while Hollywood may have taken much, it had also offered moments of connection, achievement, and meaning. Garner's truth about Steve McQueen was one piece of this larger narrative, a reminder that even the brightest stars are not immune to complexity, conflict, and the bittersweet nature of life in the spotlight. What do you think? Did Hollywood rivalry shape the careers of actors more than talent alone? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from behind the silver.